Good morning, everyone. First, let me extend a warm welcome to those of you who've traveled into my adopted hometown. It's really lovely to see, so many passionate leaders working day in and day out to fight scams. I've been reflecting quite a bit on the year that we've had. I last stood on this stage here at GASA, here at Amazon's buildings, a year ago, and discussed with all of you the early phases of our work at the Aspen Institute, convening the National Task Force on Fraud and Scam Prevention. At that time, I expressed two hopes for the year ahead, and what I would be able to say to you all at this point in time. One, that through a multi-sector dialogue, we would create a blueprint for a coordinated national strategy to prevent scams. And two, that we would have important government leadership working on the issue. I'm excited to say there's a lot of good news to report. Whew. But first of all, I always get really, really nervous before these kinds of things, looking out at such a crowd of people. The last time I was this nervous, my team, all very kind-hearted people, wanted to help calm me down, and so they asked me to play an improv game, a word association thing, something that they thought would calm me down and get creative juices flowing, loosen the mood. It backfired. I was terrible and completely choked up and got even more nervous. So I didn't try that just now. But after that incident, I did a little research to understand what maybe could have made me a better improviser. And I found some interesting parallel lessons to be had in the work that we share here. Chief among those was an improv principle some of you may know as yes and. Yes is the starting point to any good improv. It's the agreement between the actors on stage. It's what you all accept as the truth right now. And the and is the part that moves the scene forward. It's the action. It's the personal commitment. And so I thought I would use those principles of yes and to explore the momentum that's been building this year, our collective yes, and focus on this really specific urgent actions that will define our collective and, ensuring that inspiration translates directly into results that will drive down the attacks on our country, the attacks on our systems of communications and commerce and finance, and the attacks on the people that we love and the society we hold dear. So, just 2 months ago, we released this paper. I also promise that's not a scam. The paper called United We Stand, a National Strategy to Prevent Scams. It was the culmination of countless hours of work by the members of the Aspen National Task Force on Fraud and Scam Prevention, its steering committee, 80 different member institutions, and the 300 different experts who participated, many of you who are here today. The result, a comprehensive blueprint for a whole-of-society approach, a coordinated strategy to suppress fraud, modernize legal frameworks, and undermine the scam's business model by making it harder for transnational criminals to prey on American households. So the first yes we can celebrate is that 80 institutions from across key private sector industries, from technology and social media to telecommunications and commerce, banking and finance, plus public sector agencies and law enforcement and regulators and others, and valuable nonprofit organizations, consumer advocates, those providing the incredible victim services like we heard from AARP about today, educators, that we all spent significant time together in dialogue trying to work out a comprehensive scam prevention strategy. Everyone showed up because they knew there is more that we could be doing collectively. Now, many of you had some strong opinions about what the other guys should be doing. That's where we started. And what ensued were some hard conversations, some breakthroughs, real true breakthroughs in understanding across different kinds of expertise about what we all could possibly do or do more of. And there were times when we had to negotiate a viable path forward. All of that talking really mattered. And so there are a few more yeses I want to talk about before we get to our ands. And some of them actually reflect the first of my hopes from last year's summit, that of real government leadership. So first, there's evidence of real bipartisan federal support, the political will. Later today, you will hear from the newly formed Stop Scams Caucus on Capitol Hill. It's the first time Congress has signaled such dedicated bipartisan political will to tackle the issue. There are also key legislative proposals on the table that will task our government with defining a national strategy, that propose solutions to the information sharing problem, that provide greater resources and power for law enforcement to act, and that suggest relief for victims, including the kind of tax relief we just heard is needed. More importantly, all of those are bipartisan proposals. In this day, that is a major yes. Second, I think the yes we can all celebrate we heard in detail this morning, real enforcement action. As Judge Pirro outlined, we can really celebrate the launch of this Scam Center strike force and the early actions it's taken, bringing the full force of US government actions to bear against these criminal organizations. And that's coupled with multiple sanctions that have been issued this year by the Treasury and the State Department, sometimes even in collaboration with the UK government, another powerful yes, against the groups and individuals running those scam call centers. We know that when we cut off the money, we can cut off some of the lifeline of these crimes. These are major yes moments coming from our federal government. As you can see in a small sample of headlines here, and apologies to any of my friends who didn't make it into the sample, there are also major yes signals being sent from key industries that are critical in this fight, investing in and scaling scam prevention solutions. I'm sure that you will hear from these and many other companies throughout the next few days, but as a trend, there is really increased willingness from all of the sectors that scammers exploit to greater investment in scam prevention. And now that we have a blueprint, we can collectively turn to greater action. So improv practitioners, I've also learned, have a saying, you build a cathedral brick by brick. So now we each have a set of foundational bricks. Those are the yes, but the momentum will stall without bold action. So we must define our collective and. I want to use the scam prevention framework that we outlined in our paper to discuss some of the and actions we have before us today. The problem, as we've heard discussed today, is that scams against consumers are far too easy for criminals to achieve, and scams are far too lucrative. Our vision to address that problem in very simple terms is to make scam activity harder, make it less lucrative, and riskier for would-be criminals. That whole ecosystem problem requires, of course, a holistic response. That's why this national strategy that we suggest calls for something that is well articulated, appropriately resourced, and that addresses two important components that are needed. First, the actions that we must take against scams, the left-hand side, and the empowering of those actions at scale. Now, we articulated recommendations for action for every part of the scam lifecycle, from deterrence through to measurement. If any of you have looked at the document, it's dense. However, today I'm just going to spend time on 4 major themes for action before I turn to the empowerment that is needed. 4 major themes I want to talk about today: defend, detect, disrupt, and measure, all of which will be themes for our conversation over the next 2 days. So first, defend. Early on in the strategy, we outlined the need to defend our systems of technology, communications, and finance from inauthentic actors. So some of the principles we outlined there include the creation and maintenance of corporate anti-scam policies to guide internal industry actions, an improvement in the credentialing of businesses and users that could be scammers, making it harder for scammers to communicate with victims, including malicious advertising protections, and reducing access criminals have to telecommunications platforms, and making it easier for consumers and others to flag suspicious activity. So yes, we have progress to celebrate on those fronts, such as platforms that have started to flag when they suspect a consumer is communicating with a potential scammer. And we must continue to escalate those direct actions. That includes establishing clear rules of the road for defending our systems and the American people. Every sector needs a clear set of expectations regarding your own role in scam prevention. Hopefully defined jointly by industry and government so that it is both practical and feasible to implement. And one that outlines key performance indicators that you can use to track the efficacy of scam prevention. I'll return to that in a moment. And we must examine how criminals are getting in. What is the front door to any technology or communications platform or financial institution? And how are the criminals getting in? And we have to make sure that oversight of the abuse of any form of electronic communication, whether that's text or messaging apps or voice calls or emails, is uniformly protecting us against abusive scammers, regardless of the technology used to perpetrate the crime. And so if we want to have more yeses next year in our ability to defend, the call to action, particularly in this kind of room, is to ask yourself, if you are in industry in the private sector, what's the conversation you're having with your regulators and with other lawmakers on the guidance you need that would empower your ability to act more boldly? If you are in a government agency, is there clarity on the rules of the road for your part of the scam life cycle? How could you drive a process that builds further clarity? Starting to get very specific about what that means for each sector is the next brick in this cathedral we're building. Now, detect or detection. The proposed national strategy also discusses the mandate to detect criminal activity, making it impossible for criminals to hide. Recommendations here cover in-depth investments in scam detection infrastructure, such as the cross-sector information sharing exchanges, building an evidence base regarding what information is effective, and breaking down real or perceived barriers for each sector to participate in those exchanges, and to including law enforcement as part of some of them. So yes, again, we can celebrate really important advances in building that critical infrastructure that we need in the fight ahead, including technology companies sharing threat intelligence with law enforcement, as we just heard about, better detection by financial institutions of mule accounts, investments in anti-scam service providers that provide richer fraud signals and help us do a better job of tracking money movement across borders. Yes, and we have more work to do. Chief among those, I would like to say, is to ask ourselves, so what? Is the information exchanged actually leading to a scalable disruption of scam activity? And what evidence do we have that shows that? How do we talk about that with honesty in this community? And how do we invest more heavily in both knowing what's working and scaling it more widely? For private sector companies, I would say, if you have actionable signals inside your company, how do you formalize policies and procedures for sharing that data regularly? Ask yourselves those critical questions. The third priority I want to discuss is disruption, the ability to disrupt scams and process for both the private sector and law enforcement. Recommendations in this part of the paper looked at clarifying internal policies for taking down accounts at scale and with speed, investments in the infrastructure that you need to do that, whether that's internal or with other service providers, and improving the efficacy of just-in-time warnings and interventions for consumers. Here again, there are yeses, glimmers of hope to report. There's emerging evidence that platforms are removing more malicious URLs and accounts. We see financial institutions and payment platforms implementing mechanisms that ask a consumer to pause before making a potential scam payment or implementing other kinds of risk-based delays. And we also know from those of you who work with victims day in and day out that it is not enough yet. The and here must focus on agreeing to and enforcing clear takedown policies across all these sectors, combined with transparency for consumers and law enforcement about what we are doing when criminal activity is suspected and reported. The call to action, then, to increase our capabilities in disruption is to ask yourself, are you acting on the signals you're receiving? And what do you need from others inside your company or elsewhere to take action, to take down accounts or other infrastructure that scammers are using inside your institution? What investments are needed to better analyze that data and turn it into actionable signals? And how might you work more or better with law enforcement to share intelligence with them? What infrastructure or policies do you need? As we heard earlier, we have willing partners in the US government to take action, ready to share and receive actionable intelligence. How can we more firmly establish systems for companies and law enforcement to act in real time to disrupt scamming operations? Last on our system of actions, I want to turn to measurement. This proposed blueprint included a framework for how to better measure our progress in scam prevention. The task force had a working group that looked critical at how we might, as a country and as individual institutions, measure the scale of the problem, quantify trends, and track the impact of our scam prevention efforts. So yes, we are seeing some legislative proposals that would provide direction and resources to federal agencies to take those steps necessary to solve for this at a national level. And we all need better data about how we are doing to better understand the full scope of the problem. And so my charge to all of you is to say, what are your institution's key performance indicators for scam prevention? If they don't exist, what would it take to put them into practice? And how would having that data and tracking it over time help you get better at preventing scams and at sharing with all of us in the room what we can do better? I want to just touch finally today on the right-hand side here, our empowerment framework. It is the leadership that is required to do this work and the accountability structure we need in this community. Yes, the federal government is taking notice of scams. Yes, the draft legislation is starting to flow, and law enforcement actions are heating up. We have a blueprint for a national strategy and good ideas for improving how we measure the problem. All movement in the right direction. And next, we need clear, whole-of-government leadership that coordinates and empowers all of those things. Think of it as the strong foundation of this cathedral to support all of the actions to prevent scams and to minimize their harm. What will show progress and help us drive better results? For one thing, it is government leaders adopting and resourcing a formal national strategy. It's also things like congressional leadership setting an agenda of prioritized legislative reforms, which are coordinated across the many congressional committees that are required to take action. And the kinds of actions that are required would actually make law enforcement and the private sector more effective at combating scams. It also looks like the White House appointing an administrative lead to establish anti-scam goals across federal agencies and the intelligence community, directing budget resources towards those goals, and coordinating anti-scam activities while holding agencies accountable. And it looks like the federal government taking even more meaningful steps to modernize our law enforcement capabilities, including additional capacity for them to receive and analyze scam intelligence, enhancing the ability to pursue digital assets, et cetera. And finally, it's the federal government providing Good Samaritan safe harbors when industry takes action to block malicious activity. This kind of whole-of-government strategic leadership would make the federal government a more effective partner in preventing scams and reducing harm. It would empower corporate leaders and others to act more confidently and effectively in their own right. And it would mean that next year, we can actually celebrate a reduction in scam losses. So I began today by opening my heart up to you about how terrible I am at improv. But more importantly, we've talked about what is needed for a whole-of-society approach. The work of this task force that included leaders in the public and the private sector gave us a shared foundation, a national strategy, and irrefutable proof that when we come together to work through our differences, we do find solutions. We can disrupt criminal networks, we can defend our systems, and we can deliver justice for victims. But the purpose of our time together at an event such as this is to think about actions. And so the hard work of implementation is ours to do. The ands we have discussed today are not suggestions. I think of them as a mandate. It is the commitment of every single one of you in this room, whether you're a regulator, a tech executive, a finance professional, a legislator, a nonprofit advocate. It is the commitment you make this week and every week after. So I ask, when you leave here today, please be inspired by this incredible community and the progress that we're making, but also take those yeses and say, what is one measurable and that I will commit to this week and the weeks following to advance that fight? Thank you.